Welcome to the 8. I'm still happy to be joined with us with Irini Kyriakos with us and Fadi Mikhail all the way from England. As if we already have enough technical difficulties broadcasting live with England. I messed up on my end, but it's okay. Welcome to the 8. I just want to remind all of us, why do we call our second service here at St. Mark Church called the 8? The reason why it's called the 8, the number 8 reflects a new start, a new way of thinking, a new life. So in this sense, what we're talking about today is we're talking about art and life. For us, maybe to have a new view of what art is, what's the impact or what's the significance of art and the world that we live in, and what does it have to do with me pursuing more to life or me pursuing God. So from here, I'll give it to Irini as she welcomes and introduces our guests for today at the 8.
Thank you. I'm actually really excited to have Fadi on with us. I've known Fadi for, I think now a really long time, Fadi. I think from back in the day when I was working in London, we met, and I am super, super excited to have him. I'm just going to give a really brief intro to Fadi before we play one of his videos. But Fadi was born and raised in London. He graduated from the Slade School of Fine Art. So he is a true artist in the sense of an artist. And he also spent a lot of time with his iconography under Professor Isaac Fanous. He spent some time learning about iconography from him. Fadi is also very, very skilled and very talented in the fact that he's also been commissioned by the Royal Mail to produce their 2013 Christmas stamp, the Theotokos. He also was soon after that commissioned to produce 2 more matching icons for His Royal Highness Prince of Wales and his recently born grandson, Prince George. Several churches and cathedrals across the world have been decorated by Fadi. And he has also been, his icons have also been collected by international ambassadors and clergy around the world. So we are really, really lucky to have Fadi with us today. He is married to a lovely woman named Marianne and has a 1-year-old daughter named Talitha, or Tally, as they call her. So I'm super excited to have him on board. And Fadi, I actually just have one quick question for you. I know that I've known you for a while, but I never really asked you that question about why iconography. Like, what has gotten you so interested to go down the path of iconography versus your other love and passion, which is figurative oil painting?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me just check that you can hear me clearly, Irini, before I carry on. Yeah, it's clear now. That's good. I've probably told this story too many times, but let me try again. The truth is, when I was studying painting when I was much younger, all I was really interested in was the sort of the beautiful sensual quality of paint, and I think that probably resonates a lot with most painters. They love the materials, they love the smell of the materials, the feel of the materials. And for many of us, sometimes that's all that matters. The image almost comes as a secondary item to the painting. And for me, that was certainly the way going forward. And I used to see icons around me in church, and I even saw them at home because my dad is a very talented painter as well. And whenever I saw him paint, or even when I just looked at his icons, I always thought, God, they look so boring to paint. They're so fine and detailed, and God, that's the absolute enemy of how I want to paint. I love just scraping off big chunks of oil paint and smothering it on canvas, on my face. I don't care, anywhere, just so I could enjoy the oil paint. But then something around 18 moved me. I'm hoping it was God. Otherwise, I followed a very wrong path. And I felt like he was calling me and saying, don't you want to paint about more than just fiction? Because actually my subject matter for my paintings were mostly children's folklore and from children's literature. And I sort of felt, yes, I do want to paint about more than just literature and folklore. I do want to paint about my face, something that's really real to me. So I did feel this calling to just go and watch another iconographer. What if my heart is moved? So miraculous happenings allowed me to go and watch Professor Isaac Fanous paint what would be his last church in Los Angeles in America. And he just sort of said, come, sit here, just watch. And for a whole month solid, I just watched. I didn't pick up a paintbrush. And it was a real eye opener, because I suddenly could see that here was a man who proved to me that he loved the process just as much as what I perceived to be the content. You know, he loved the materials, he loved the smell, and that for him was just as spiritual in many ways, it seemed, as the content itself. And of course, what a glorious fusion when you can bring together two big things you love: God, your faith, and of course the things you enjoy, paint. So for me, it was just an eye opener, and the rest, in some ways, is history, because I just loved more and more the process, even though it took a lot of practice, and it continues to take practice. And you know, no person trying to master is ever a master of that skill until I don't know what point, they probably never are. But I'm still learning so much just from practicing this difficult technique, and understanding more and more as day goes by.
All right, so we take it from here. The
Yeah,
video?
so I think Fadi has shared with us a little video that we're going to show before we go through Q&A. So we're going to play that really quick for a few minutes, and then we have some questions that we've received that we'll go ahead and ask you, Fadi, and then any other questions that we get, if you guys are wanting to ask any questions, you could go ahead and ask them via the YouTube chat. Okay?
As you've probably heard before, the word icon is a Greek word that means image. And images in our world are everywhere, aren't they? I mean, whether we're inside church or we're outside church, humankind, have always made images. We make images of what we do, images of who we are, and most importantly, images of what or who we've seen. At home or at work, and even in our purses and wallets, we often keep pictures of people we know, sons and daughters, or even grandparents who have passed away, people who we've seen and who have touched our lives. Every now and then we bring out that image of them, their icon, to remind ourselves of who they are to us. As an Orthodox Christian, that habit probably doesn't sound too unfamiliar, does it? And it's no different really when it comes to icons. 2,000 years ago, our God, the invisible God, who St. John said no one had ever really seen, came down from heaven and took on a visible body so we could see him. In fact, St. John goes on to say, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. And Jesus, the Word of God, Jesus of Nazareth, had such an impact on the world that the people around him, of course, couldn't help but declare what they'd seen, what they'd heard of this man. Some spoke about it, like the Samaritan woman or the blind man. Some wrote about it, like the evangelists in the Gospels. And of course, some painted about it. The first images of Jesus were made during his lifetime by people who saw him and followed him, or whose lives were touched by him. The disciple Luke was one of the first and made several paintings of Jesus with his mother. The woman who had been healed when she had touched the cloak of Jesus also had 2 sculptures made at her home, one of her reaching out to touch Jesus and the other of Jesus turning back to touch her. Some of the icons that were made while Jesus was on earth were even made by Jesus himself. To name at least 3 of these that are known by reputation: 1, the veil of St. Veronica, who pressed a cloth to Christ's face on the road to the cross. 2, the image of Edessa, where Christ reportedly sent a cloth marked with the image of his face to the king of Edessa, who was suffering from illness. And 3, and most famously of all, the Shroud of Turin. Because they had effectively been made by God himself, we call these the icons not made by human hands. But that's enough history for now, because one of the more important questions we should ask ourselves as Orthodox Christians is why we do anything we do at church. What is the spiritual benefit of this ritual? and icons are really no different. And to answer that question, we're going to go back to the Transfiguration story. Why? Because the Transfiguration story explains almost everything we need to know about the benefit of iconography. Now, the story goes, Jesus took 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, up a mountain. And while they were walking, these disciples suddenly saw Jesus in a way they'd never seen him before, shining as bright as the sun from inside out and accompanied by Moses and Elijah. What happened in that moment was not that Jesus had suddenly changed. He had always been the same, but that the disciples had been given the opportunity to glimpse reality, the kingdom of heaven, God's perfect world, as it really was. A world where men would be united with God again and would shine with the glory of God inside them. A world where we could see God as he truly is, because as St. John says in his gospel, we had become like him. A story I was once told about the late Pope Carolus goes, he was giving communion to his congregation during a liturgy one day, and standing beside him was one of his close deacons who noticed that every so often the Pope would stop and whisper something in a person's ear and send them away without giving them communion. The deacon was surprised by this and asked, "Pope, what's wrong? Why are you sending them away?" The Pope realized, "Do you not see what I see?" And with that, the Pope placed his hand on the deacon's head and prayed, "Lord, please help him to see." With that, the deacon looked around to see the people in the church shining with light, but there were some whose light was not shining, but whose faces were dimmed. And he realized at that moment, those people were perhaps not ready to receive the holy mysteries. The deacon's spiritual eyes had been opened to see the world not as it appeared to the human eye, but as it really was in the spiritual realm. When we are presented with icons, we're actually invited to have the same opportunity or experience, just like the 3 disciples. We get to see as God sees. We get to see the perfected spiritual bodies of the saints, shining with halos around them because they're shining from the inside out. We get to see past and present and future, all in a glimpse, all in one moment, all in one image. In this icon of St. Mina, for instance, we see the historical moment that the camels indicated where God willed that St. Mina should be buried. But in the same icon, we see St. Mina alive, not buried, in his glorified, resurrected body, his head shining with a golden light around it, a halo. We even see the angels holding a crown of martyrdom above his head. And even though it hadn't been built in his lifetime, we see the monastery of St. Mina on the left, past, present, and future, in a single glimpse, just as God would see it. One of the questions I'm asked quite regularly is, why is the Orthodox style of iconography so strange? Why is it abstract and not realistic? Why do the people in Coptic icons seem shorter than they would in real life? And there are many reasons why we do this in Orthodox iconography, use an abstract style. But the most important one is the Church wants to focus the worshipper towards the beauty of the spiritual realm and of the things that have to do with the kingdom of God, because it's everlasting, rather than spend too much time admiring the beauty of the world which we see around us, which one day will fade away. It's pretty well documented that the aim of paintings made in a realistic style, especially those that were developed during the Italian Renaissance period, was to celebrate the beauty of the body, of the human physique, and to celebrate the impressive skill of the artists who were able to recreate those bodies in paint. But in Orthodox iconography, the Church aims to focus our attention away from the impressiveness of individual artists and away from the beauty of the human body that will fade away, and focus us towards the beauty of the incorruptible, transfigured body, which followers of Christ acquire through the work of the Holy Spirit. To answer this a bit more, I actually want to read you a poem by an old English poet called William Blake. Now, a little bit of the poem goes like this. The vision of Christ that thou dost see is my vision's greatest enemy. Thine has a great hook nose like thine, mine has a snub nose like to mine. Both read the Bible day and night, but thou readst black, where I read white. Why am I reading you a poem by an English poet when I'm trying to describe to you something that happens in an artistic style that was born in the Middle East? Well, what the poem is trying to say very simply is that you and I, in fact, no two people on earth, see or hear Jesus in their imagination quite the same way. He's the same God, but you and I perceive him differently. In our imagination, he sounds a little different, he looks a little different, even though he's the same person. Because of that, we need an image of Jesus that is so simple, so stripped back, that it's almost as if the specific features on his face aren't important. You might have heard the saying, less is more. Well, in iconography, that really is true. And that's why our iconography is not realistic. It's abstract. To reduce Jesus and his followers to simple lines and color and geometric shapes, so that the icon is only a reminder or a diagram of Jesus and isn't a very specific image saying, this is exactly what Jesus looks like. We live in an age where, thank God, new churches are being built all the time, all over the world. And when they are, new icons are made to be placed into the iconostasis, which is the large wooden screen at the front of the church. Now, sometimes people ask me, why on earth have we built this enormous wooden barrier between us, the congregation, and the altar, where, symbolically speaking, God resides? Doesn't it say in the gospel that when Jesus was crucified, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, so that all men now had access freely to God through Jesus Christ, freely to the altar? Well, the iconostasis is not meant to be a barrier at all. Far from it. Let me explain. If you break down the architecture of a church building, you'll see that the main part of the church, where we, the congregation, stand, is called the nave. Now, the word nave comes from the word navis, which means ship or boat. So wait, if we are in a ship, where are we traveling to? The answer to that is simple. We are all on a journey to the Father through Jesus Christ. So what is the wooden barrier that seems to stand between us? This iconostasis is actually a bridge between us and the Father, and is a wonderful symbol of Jesus himself, who bridged the gap between us and the Father. And on this bridge are images of some of the moments and some of the people that led to this bridge being built. There's St. Mary, who gave birth to Jesus. There's St. John the Baptist, the last prophet, crying in the wilderness, make a path and be ready for the coming of the Lord. And most importantly, finally, there is Jesus himself, who is the doorway and the gate, the only way to the Father. The next time you walk into a church or a home filled with icons, remember these two things. One, icons are proof, handed down from generation to generation, that God, who had never been seen, in Jesus had finally been seen. Jesus made the Father and God himself visible to us, known to us, and we just can't stop talking about it, or in this case, painting about it. Two, icons are an invitation to you to see as God sees, to see the world not as it appears, but as it really is in God's eyes, the kingdom of heaven, which is here and now.
All right. Well, thank you, Fadi, for sharing that video with us. That was awesome. I mean, it covers a lot of bases. It covers a lot of bases as far as art in general and iconography in the ancient church. My first question, unless you want to, I was going to go and jump into the question. So just a reminder for everyone that's with us on YouTube Live is feel free to ask any questions in the live chat on YouTube. We'll, like, Irini and I will ask some questions to Fadi, but then feel free to add some questions if something comes up. But my first question for you, Fadi, I guess, is at a high level. Art as a whole, what we see in art is that there is like colors to reflect different emotions, if you will. Like we see gold being used for royalty, or black to reflect sadness. So like this transcends any culture, and we kind of see it in very aspects of life. Why?
Well, I guess I'm glad you brought art and emotions. It's probably a concept I've been battling with my whole life as a student of art, because first I started, of course, in secular art, and although I do continue in paintings about literature, of course I work as an iconographer now. So trying to balance those two things is always sometimes, well, it's sometimes a struggle. I think what I've come to learn through other iconographers is that one thing that differentiates true church, authentic church iconography from secular forms of art is actually the cutting out of passionate emotion. Of course, when I say passionate, what I mean is sort of extreme emotion. Because I mean, really, while secular art might try hard to sort of ask us to respond with our emotions when we look at imagery, by encouraging us to get angry at maybe a political image, or maybe laugh at a funny one, or become overcome with grief at a very sad scene. When it comes to orthodox iconography, the aim is very different. The aim is to encourage us to respond not with strong emotions, but actually with our spirits, kind of soberly with our understanding, to look at an icon and to be encouraged to think about the life of the person shown in the icon and meditate on our own lives when compared with that saint. So when it comes to iconography and colors in iconography, the church is actually not trying to conjure up emotions in us by using passionate reds or blazing oranges. And one of the simplest ways, I suppose, to understand what a color might mean in an icon is to look around the natural world, to look around nature and think, what is this color similar to in nature? And black paint, for instance, you know, when we use black paint in an icon, we usually see black when there is no light, you know, maybe down a deep well or something, perhaps in a dark hole. There is nothing in there. There is no color, no light, no life, just darkness and emptiness. I feel pretty safe arguing that, at least for the majority of us, the kind of thoughts those things stir up when we see black paint are emptiness, sadness, loneliness, maybe the nighttime. So when a black is used in a painting, for instance, in an icon, the color might be used, for instance, around Satan, to say this is the space around Satan. And the iconographer is trying to help conjure up the things that are associated with that color: emptiness, the lack of light, the lack of God. Those things are facts that we understand about Satan and his world. They aren't emotions that the church wants you to feel about Satan. They're just facts about the atmosphere around him, for instance. And I suppose the same goes for the color red. You know, when it's shown on the garments of a saint who was martyred, red looks a lot like blood. And so it's simply a factual trigger to let you know that this person was a person who died as a martyr. When it comes to white, maybe the things we see in nature that are white are clean, pure, perfect, things that sort of bring refreshment to our minds. Things like clouds, white bed sheets, the wool of a white sheep, maybe. And so when we clothe the saints in white, just like we clothe Jesus in white, the iconographers are trying to give you cues to remember what we know factually about Jesus and our becoming like him. You know, he will impart the same pure, perfect holiness to us so that we can stand in front of the Father on the last day without feeling blemished.
All right. Thank you, Fadi. I guess maybe a question that precedes this, I probably should have asked this first, is some people would say, especially those who pursue God and maybe another Christian tradition besides an ancient Orthodox tradition, it's easy to say, okay, isn't the centerpiece of me pursuing more in life and me pursuing God, like that, it's based on a relationship. Like, so shouldn't I just remove any type of distractions, or maybe potentially something that could be a graven image? So something that could distract me. Why don't I just pursue just authentically, just me? It's me and Jesus. It's just me and pursuing God, and any other type of visual imagery or that could be, be a distraction. I should remove that. Like, what would you tell somebody that would ask that question to you?
Yeah, it is an age-old question, isn't it? And I suppose the basis for that question could very well come from the prohibition of images that we see in the commandments that God gave. He said, I don't want you to make images of anything either in heaven or on earth. So yeah, the question always comes up, why on earth are we making icons? Are we making these graven images that were prohibited by God? Shortly after those commandments, God actually gives instructions on how to decorate the temple. And I think it's important for us to understand that. He gives instructions on how exactly the cherubim should look above the ark. Why would he do that if indeed we were just trying to devoid ourselves completely of imagery? There's a very lovely book by a British iconographer called Aidan Hart. And I think the way the book actually starts, it always sort of struck me. He said, men have always been makers of images. Whether from the beginning of time all the way up to now, we've always made images. And going back to the video that you just watched, you see that even in Aborigine art or prehistoric art, you see men always making images of what they do, what they think they are, who they think they are, and who they've seen, what they've seen. And I suppose the question is whether you're able truly deeply in your heart to say, yes, I need no cue at all in my spiritual life to remember God is all around me. If you're the kind of person who finds that God is always in your mind without any cue, and when I say a cue, of course, I mean other Christians encouraging you. Have you prayed today? Have you thought about God? What have you said to God today? What has he said to you? Or, have you attended a Bible study? Have you attended church? Without these cues in our Christian life, sometimes, at least for myself, I can speak honestly, I sometimes forget to talk to God. We're so consumed with seeing the world around us, doing my job, tending to my baby, looking after my daughter and babysitting. Have I got her food ready? Have I got dinner ready for me and my wife? And it's so easy to forget about the spiritual realm. And so, sometimes we can allude to the fact that maybe I can seem like a distraction. But are they really? They're not meant to be at all. They're meant to be visual cues to say, have you considered this person today? Have you thought about Christ today? Have you talked to him? Have you thought about St. Mina? Have you thought about St. George? Have you thought about what they risked, what they did for God? Are you the same? Think about your life. They're visual cues. And so if you think about them as distractions, perhaps I would challenge you to think about it differently. Are you the kind of person who needs no visual cues, honestly? Are you the kind of person who needs no verbal cues? If you are, amazing for you. Truthfully, I am not. And I think the Orthodox Church teaches us somewhat that I don't think anybody really is. We all need cues of some kind to remind us about the people we don't see with our human eyes. They reside all around us spiritually in the spiritual realm, but we need cues.
And it proves a point, Fadi. I think we're all visual people. Our divine designer created us to be visual. I mean, if that was not the saints, if that was not the case, God could have only created one shade of red, one shade of orange, or just made one mountain, one river. But he created such a wide array of creation because we're visual. Like, we see the reflection of the divine in all of that. So it proves the point that just as we can use creation to see God, we can also use, iconography and art to be a window into God as well. So from here, Irini, we'll ask some questions for you, Fadi.
Yeah, we had some questions come in, Fadi, around are icons considered cultural? Is it wrong to depict St. Mary with Asian features or other features, or the disciples with darker skin like we see in Ethiopian icons? What are we allowed to do within icons? What are we not allowed to do?
Yeah, I wondered whether this question might come up in the current context of Black Lives Matter. And it's a very pertinent question. I think it's a very important discussion to have. In fact, it's been coming up a lot, even that question within the context of iconography. There's another wonderful iconographer in the UK called Ian Knowles, and he started a school called the Bethlehem Icon School online. And he's actually made a video specifically for this question. So I would encourage anyone who really wants to know the answer to this question to go onto YouTube and look for the Bethlehem Icon School online, and to look for Ian's video on this. He talks about what are the limits that we can go to when we represent Jesus in iconography. And although I'm probably going to summarize very badly, I think I'll just try and summarize some of the important points that I picked up from that amazing video that he made. And really what he said is what's important is to be sensitive to a culture. And when he said that, actually, I remembered somebody once told me that Pope Shenouda, when Coptic churches were being built or begun in Kenya, one of the things that the late Pope made very well sure of is that we didn't impose our own musical culture on the Kenyans. We actually, we offered them the Orthodox liturgy, as St. Basil taught us. But when it came to the music, they effectively had their own culture to infuse into it, because it's a means to worship, and when it comes to the means of worship, of course, that within the Orthodox Church is changeable. The one thing that doesn't change is sort of capital T tradition, the understanding of Jesus as taught to us by the Gospels and by the tradition passed down to us from the apostles. But the means of actual worship and the means of music and the means of imagery is changeable. In fact, I do remember there's a 20th century theologian who Leonard Ouspensky is his name. He was actually the teacher, the iconographic teacher of the person that I learned from, Isaac Fanous, Professor Isaac Fanous. And he said something very, very potent. He said, iconography, I'm paraphrasing badly, forgive me. Iconography should always be made in the visual language of its time. I'll say it again, the visual language of its time. And of course, if you look at that on the face of it, that seems like it gives a world of liberal space for people to do anything they like. Of course, it takes a group of iconographers within the church and in prayer to discuss how sensitively to approach and understand a phrase like that. And quite rightly, I think Justin Welby, the Archbishop of the UK, he said that perhaps we should rethink our imagery in the church of white Jesus. He was Middle Eastern. Now, I think all of us agree, yes, of course, Jesus came from a Middle East background. Who Jesus was is so much more important than what he looked like. And for that reason, in many ways, it's certainly permissible for any culture to have imagery of Jesus and inside their own culture, because, well, one word that comes to mind from Ian Knowles's video from the Bethlehem Icon School is dissonance or resonance. Do the images that are made by iconographers in, say, the Indian culture or the Ethiopian culture or even a Caucasian culture in Europe, do they resonate with those who are looking at them? When people are in an Ethiopian church, if they themselves are Ethiopian, the faces they're looking at are Ethiopian, they're dark-skinned. And the same would go for Asian churches, or the same would go for any church of any culture. What you see is what you're used to. It resonates with you. So there is, to some extent, a need for sensitivity to be resonant with the parishioners rather than dissonant. If what they go and see, if the churches in Kenya had images, for instance, of a purely white Jesus, it would cause dissonance, to their spirituality. The icon would almost be the end in itself. What you see, it would be a visual distraction rather than a harmonious door to prayer. They would see it and they say, oh, it's a very strange person in our midst. But if it were the same sort of person in their midst, if he was more than a color, if he was a symbol, if he was what he tried to do, if what Jesus accomplished was the main key to what you saw in an icon, that would be what's more important. And Jesus is so much more than a color. He is an incarnate person. His key role, or at least one of them, was to bring the two natures together to make man and God one again. And mankind, it doesn't matter whether European or African or Asian, man is one. We're all just different shades of the same skin. But Jesus was man, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, like, Fedi, I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about abstract art and how even when we paint the icon of Christ, it's abstract because we all have our different perspectives of what Christ looks like. And it
Exactly.
kind of falls into that same like conversation or like comment that you made earlier around that bit, right? Like if I'm sitting in Japan, my perspective of what Christ may look like will be different and may fall into that abstractness that you were talking about.
Absolutely, and it's a continual conversation that will happen among iconographers. To what degree exactly can we evolve into certain sensitivities and cultures and images and cultures, and what remains tightly within the iconographic traditions without overstepping it, but still remaining authentic to a culture.
Before Irini asks the next question, just one correction, Fedi, is I love how you give the example about the Kenyan church, the Orthodox church in Kenya, how they used music and art for them to connect with the ancient church using their culture, using the Saint Basil liturgy. All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did I say? Forgive me.
I think Basel or something. I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Making fun of his accent. So
I'm just not used to it. It just caught me off guard. So, but anyway, Irini, we'll go with the next question.
Cross-cultural nuances. Next question that came through. An ancient Christian tradition has been venerating icons, but when I do, I feel I am just kissing wood and paint. How do I get past that mentality? That's something I think we hear a lot, especially from those who didn't grow up in the Orthodox Church, Fedi. So like the idea of venerating an icon is something that's a struggle. So just would be great to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I can totally understand that struggle. I think my answer would be that veneration comes in many forms, and there is not one way to venerate an icon, just as there is no one way to show your appreciation to God after he's blessed you with something. And when it comes to worship and veneration in our spiritual lives, I think honesty and sincerity are what's important. To be yourself and to give something to God that really means something to you authentically. It was Jesus himself who said that the Father is seeking those who worship in spirit and truth. And I think to be true to yourself and to give truthfully to God is what's important. I think I once heard a story, again, I'm going to paraphrase it badly, forgive me. I heard that one day someone was sitting in an empty church during a weekday, and they secretly witnessed a clown entering the church alone. And the awkwardness of how the clown entered made it quite obvious that he felt a little out of his comfort zone, being in such a serene place where stillness and quietness was the normal sort of etiquette. But as he approached the altar, wanting to pray, he struggled to find the words. And so he brought out his juggling balls and he began to perform in front of the altar. He took the best talent that he'd been given and he gave it back to God. In an unashamed honesty, he gave everything he had to give. And I go back to the video lecture that I gave a few minutes ago. We mentioned that obvious parallels can be drawn between icons and images of our family that we carry around with us in our wallets or we keep in frames at home. And I remember when I was growing up that I would see lots of older members of my family kiss pictures like those of our deceased parents or grandparents. And I always found it quite strange when I was younger, like maybe it seemed a bit overly sentimental. And now that I do have a daughter, it's pretty hard to hold yourself back from kissing and hugging her. I kind of understand that sometimes when I'm not with her, just imagining her doesn't always suffice. I want visual cues like a video of her or a photo of her. And when I'm so overcome with my feelings, looking at the image or watching the video, I can understand why so many people can't hold themselves back from kissing the screen or maybe holding it tightly to their chest to embrace the person. So, I mean, they don't really think that the screen is the person they love. Of course not. But it begins a connection. It's a doorway to that person. So I suppose to answer the question more directly, how do I get past the feeling that I'm just kissing wood and paint when I venerate an icon? I would challenge the person who asked that question maybe to seek the spirit and not the letter of the law when it comes to that tradition. If kissing an icon isn't what comes naturally to you when you want to venerate the saint depicted in the icon, find a way that means something to you, something that is sincerely, honestly you. But do find something traditions like these, kneeling down or bowing our heads or closing our eyes, they're meant to encourage, to push ourselves out of the laziness of doing nothing. Because if we did nothing, we would get nothing.
You know, that's a great reminder for all of us, Fadi, is like, I feel a big hindrance for many people to grow in the Orthodox faith is we're not worshiping icons. We're not worshiping the paint and the wood that's there. But like you said, the magic word is veneration, is that we're giving reverence to what this icon is reflecting.
Yeah.
So
I suppose if I can interject, sorry, like a parallel as easy to bring up is maybe the book of the Bible. You know, when you have the book of the Bible at home, you also have many other books on the shelves, I'm sure. And you know, sometimes if you're careless, you might drop the other books. But if you ever drop the Bible, you'd probably give yourself a slap on the wrist, because there is something about knowing that this is the Word of God, the manual for himself. You know, that there is something to be said about that book in particular. And icons are sort of the same thing when you compare it to secular imagery. You might have secular imagery that reminds you of maybe going to church, but as for an image of Jesus himself, because it's a door, a cue to him, then there is something to be respected, to be venerated for about it. But it's always a sobering reminder that actually through history, we've lost almost all of the examples of Coptic iconography, because the church actually had a tradition to prove that we don't worship icons, that when they are damaged to an extent beyond repair, they're actually burnt and the ashes are used in incense. You know, so it's really a reminder that it is ultimately just wood and paint that can be refashioned, almost recycled in worship, burnt down, taken again and used in worship. But it's not the object that we worship. It's the person inside the icon that we venerate. These are doorways, they're windows, they're cues, visual cues to the person, so that you're not sort of worshipping the person of the icon, but the person through the icon, as it were.
I was just going to say one thing before Irini says, like, I'm glad, Fadi, that you brought up that, like, for us not to be letter of the law, as far as like, if you're not feeling to kiss the icon, you can still show reverence toward it. You can still venerate it in such a wide array of ways. Just as you mentioned, we have multiple spiritual exercises for us to be engaged in liturgical worship. And it's funny how you brought up, like, right now, like, I notice I'm like, the gospel, it's funny you brought up the Bible. I don't kiss the Bible in liturgical services now, or me or the deacons don't kiss it because we're wearing a mask. But I can still show reverence toward it by just bowing my head of the reality of what it is. But it's not about the logistics of me kissing it. So that's a great example, and it's appropriate right now as far as how we can still capture the spirit without getting stuck on kiss or not kiss.
So I think the questions that we have, do you want to go through? I have a couple that got texted to me. Okay. So one of the questions, there's two questions that came through, Fadi. What is your most favorite icon? And what are some misconceptions, misinterpretations people have about icons in general?
Well, I suppose I'll start with the last part of that question. The misinterpretations, or the questions that come up most regularly, are probably the ones that I've addressed in the video, and I think that's why I made that particular video lecture. People always wonder, why on earth would we make an iconostasis? It feels like a barrier between us and the Holy of Holies. It just seems completely the opposite of what Jesus tried to accomplish by breaking down the barrier and bridging the gap between us and the Father. So trying to answer the question about what the iconostasis is always quite important to me, and I hope that was reflected adequately in the video. My favorite icon, I have to admit, it changes quite regularly, but since I've done well, that video that you just saw and a few others that are part of our online course that's available now, I think the Transfiguration actually has become my favorite image in iconography, at least for now. I'm sure in a couple of weeks it'll change when I'm commissioned something else, or when I see something else by one of my colleagues in iconography, because it's so full of meaning, and trying to explain in a nutshell what the icon is. I think I was saying this to you a while back, Abuna, that when it comes to maybe even my own spirituality and trying to understand what the icon is in my own life, I take it somewhat as a parable, because when Jesus did use parables to teach. Of course, they were trying to convey a huge amount of theology that for most was too much to take. And so, of course, a parable was just enough as a nutshell to give them what they needed in order to follow Jesus and understand Jesus to the extent that was sufficient to live the kind of life he needed us to live. And in many ways, iconography is just like that. It's like a good piece of music. If you listen to a good piece of music, on the face of it, your enjoyment should be the surface part of the music. You know, just the hearing of it should do what it is needed. And then if you want to know more about the artist who made the music, of course, when you get to know about their history, their biography, what they do, where they're playing now, can I go and watch them live? Then you really get into their particular kind of music and you enjoy even more. If you want to know a certain amount about iconography, on the face of it, the image alone should be enough for you to be cued, to pray, to worship, to think about the people depicted in the icons. And of course, if you want to know more, there is a world to know more about iconography. But do you need to know it? Is up to your level of spirituality and between you and your confession father and your spiritual guide. So when it comes to, I'm sorry, I've digressed from that question. My favorite image, trying to understand iconography in a nutshell, is so well explained in the Transfiguration, because it's so potent to understand that even though Christ was transfigured before them, really, as Aidan Hart, the UK iconographer, said in his book, maybe it was actually the disciples whose eyes were transfigured at that moment. You know, maybe it was them that something was revealed to them that had always been. You know, it's not something new. It had always been, but they were just allowed a glimpse of it for a moment, the reality that they hadn't seen with their human eyes. And that's why I love the Transfiguration icon so much at the moment.
No, somebody asked the same question on YouTube as far as what's your favorite icon. So I guess people are interested. You doing so many icons, which one is your favorite? But to close off.
Yeah, I think just one thing, Fadi, I don't know if you could give us really quickly an overview. I saw that you posted a course, an online iconography course that people can take if they're interested in learning more. Maybe you could just give us a snippet of what it entails.
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I'll start with the reason we made it. You know, all Coptic iconographers working in the world now are all inundated with people coming to them and saying, I want to learn, I want to know more, I want to try it. I think maybe God is calling me to learn about iconography. And so until now, it's been very difficult to try and find the ability to get people in person in our studios to try and teach them one-to-one, because someone in America might contact someone in the UK, someone in Australia might contact someone in America. And so trying to get something online that people can really sink their teeth into has been quite important. And that's why we've created the course, so that people can start from scratch online. And if they decide that, yes, actually, this is my calling, then we can take it from there in a more developed way. So the course is online. It's what it aims to do is take you through the very important and sort of rudimentary drawing techniques of creating a face frontally or turned, trying to understand how to make hands, make full-size bodies, and understand how, when the Coptic tradition was redeveloped in the 1950s and 60s by Professor Isaac Fanous, how did he create the rules that govern what the faces and the bodies should look like? So that's what the course is about. And it also includes the video that we've just seen and other videos which are added all the time about the history of the Coptic style throughout, you know, pharaonic times, all the way to sort of 10th century murals that we see in Egypt, right to now the 1960s and post-1960s neo-Coptic or contemporary Coptic style that you see in churches mostly today. And sorry, I didn't even mention where you can access it. I'm so sorry. Well, the course is accessible if you go to ukcopticicons.com, or if you Google Coptic Icon online course, you'll find it.